what's cool and fascinating about you guys is that you're actually from this area. And, it's like I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles, and there's always bands from LA, San Francisco, New York. You don't often hear about bands necessarily from the Triangle area. And you even said in a previous interview where you talked about, you said it's great to lean into this place where we're from. And I'm just curious, how do you do that with your music?
Yeah. I think part of it is that we don't try to be too deliberate about that. It feels like the honest way of being a band or a musician from North Carolina is to make the music that you make that feels honest, and in the sense that you are from the place, if you are and we are, it will become a reflection of that place. We don't go to the drawing board and say like, all right, Doc Watson plus Super Chunk equals Mipso 2022.
Yeah.
It's like, I hope that we sound like we're from here because we are.
Okay.
And I think that it's a cool place to be from to make music because there is like a rich layered history of the music scene around here. And that was a cool thing coming of age here. On the one hand, there's so many studios that you can pop into and play. There's so many great venues. There's so many great older musicians who I think the spirit is always that they're very welcoming here. And so we were like in a fertile ground to become musicians. And also, if I am invested in this state, the idea of this state and this place and everything about it. So it's been a fun process to learn the history myself. And there's like the ones that are on billboards, like Libba Cotton, as she should be. And Doc Watson, like I said.
Yeah.
But then there's different layers at every era of amazing artists from right around here that there's so much to learn from. So we're lucky.
So it sounds to me when you lean into it, it also means like don't lean into other things because I think there's a lot of bands from there's been musicians from rural parts of the country that try and have the New York sound, the LA sound, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas you just said, all right, we're gonna, go with whatever is naturally us.
That's how I feel. When I go to music, I don't want to hear someone that has self-consciously crafted a sound to fit someone's pre-existing expectations. So I think as a musician, the only way I could do that, honestly, and I do think it's something I take seriously. So I would say ethically would be to make it in a way that feels honest to me rather than crafting it to match something that's supposed to happen,
Yeah.
It has to be a process of letting something happen rather than forcing something to happen for me to feel like music making was both, I think, enjoyable and honest.
And, well, you can certainly argue that and forgive me, it's always hard to categorize bands for me, but
Go for it.
The bluegrass Americana folk mesh that you are, you could argue that that's also another thing of okay, we're going to be this and not just automatically go towards something more pop or more rock or more trendy.
That's true, and I'd say I like limitations, but that's a good point that. We're doing something deliberately, no matter what. Even just choosing what instruments you play, we're certainly aware that by having a mandolin and a fiddle in the band, and an upright bass, and acoustic guitar, all those things kind of like carve out our comparisons for us. But I think it's comforting to lean back on what the songs are.
Yeah.
And although I grew up with uncles that play banjo and dobro, and my grandma plays guitar, and she started me out on a lot of music. So I don't think it feels like a stretch for me to be around those instruments. It feels like a natural place to let something happen. And when we're making songs, we're never saying what would fit on a fiddle. We better make sure we make something that fits on a fiddle. We say, what do we want to make? Okay, cool. How do we fit a fiddle into it?
Oh, okay.
So maybe that's a subtle difference, but it's a freeing way of making music rather than a limiting one, at least the way that I think about it.
Yeah, and yet Libby is it seems to be a constant presence with her fiddle on every track, and so...
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying even if you stumbled across an idea, even she would say, you know what, I don't think a fiddle really belongs with this tune.
That does happen, and actually she's playing some keys and piano these days too. Which is just because she can and she's good at it and it's fun, and sometimes it frees me to play more electric lead stuff while, you know, still having something on the kind of like chordal meat of a song.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's nice to have different ingredients to play with, because sometimes fiddle is too strong of a flavor. You're right. Yeah.
And yet, you know, listening to you guys' stuff and also watching videos of you guys play, you have, I guess you could call it kind of a subtle touch with, you know, your instruments. There's a gentleness to it. And somebody even, you know, someone say, oh, well, that's because they're playing what's traditionally acoustic instruments. But, you know, like take, say, like a Stephen Stills on an acoustic guitar.
Oh, yeah.
You know, plays very aggressively.
Yeah.
Whereas you know, it seems are more intent on, all right, each note is going to ring out and that kind of thing, and harmonize kind of thing. And I'm wondering, is that intentional, or was that just kind of your personality coming through in your playing?
That's a good question. I appreciate you saying that too, because I think that I've arrived at that place. When I started out as a guitar player, I had a tendency, as I think a lot of young musicians do, to fill the space as much as possible. And I think listening to music, learning more about what I love in music, I realized that some of that comes from a sense of anxiety of, here I am, on some basic level, I'm kind of scared. I better do something, because if I'm doing nothing, I'm freaking out, you know? And so for me, it's been hard, but I've really enjoyed becoming a musician who can leave space. But I like hearing it. I think that's how the process happens a lot. It's sort of an osmosis of what do you like in other things and how do you absorb that into yourself. Not so much on purpose as like it just happens if you're following what you like. Yeah, I tend towards thoughtful space leavers in my music listening, you know?
Well, I mean, and I would say that the way you play guitar reflects the way you sing as well, you know? And so it's again, it's not in your face. It's not a, you know, grab the person by the shirt collars kind of thing. It's much more, I'm having a conversation with you, or just telling you a story. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, one time an interview, no, it was a review of an album. I remember this. It's one of those early reviews that kind of leaves a scar. Although I don't think they were wrong. This early review called us polite. And it was like in the context of a compliment on the album, but it was like,
right,
you know, polite, it's hard not to feel like that was an insult. But I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I think that it shouldn't, I hope it doesn't come across as like apologetic, like, please can we have your attention? I'm so sorry we're taking your time. I think of it more as like, we don't need to yell. There's all kinds of ranges of emotion that work well with songs. So yeah, sometimes you want to whisper something and it feels powerful. Sometimes saying something quietly is the loudest way to say it in a way.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like if you go to see Alison Krauss and Union Station, you know, they have very much, you know, I would group you guys together in terms of your delivery and your performance, sure, and also not, you know, smacking people over the head with their sound. And I remember when I saw them in concert, you know, she was talking to the crowd and said, people always come to us and say, why do you write such sad songs? And she's like, well, we're sad people.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, and again, it's just, you know, I think, you know, and she was joking around a lot, yeah, but it was, you know, it's just, well, that's the stories they tell, that's the perfect delivery for those particular stories.
Yeah, what was the, you know, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy for a different reason.
Yeah.
Someone Russian said that. I think there's a lot of nuance between the two, of course, but yeah, on some level, I don't feel like everything's okay, and it wouldn't feel honest for me to make purely happy-go-lucky music, where, as if the purpose was to like invite people to a space, let's all carve out a space in our lives, let's all get together, and let's all tell each other that everything is okay.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, honestly, who I think is one of the greatest songwriters of the 20th century is Bob Marley, and he's kind of caricaturized as like what a little white kid like me would have in their dorm room at age 19. but he's a kind of a prophetic songwriter and a spiritual songwriter, and someone that was really concerned with, like, I think deeper spiritual truths in a cool way.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a lot of positivity in his music, but it was in the context of like a political struggle.
Yeah.
And so for me, if it's purely positivity, there's something, maybe there's something missing there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against positivity in the sense of like what we're doing is getting together, and there's a powerful, I think, spiritual communal aspect to that that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I'm a sad person.
Yeah.
I don't know, how can you live in the world and not experience some sadness? To me, that's powerful stuff. I want to hear that, so I want to give that to other people too.
Yeah.
I'm not sad all the time, to be clear. I feel good right now.
No, but it's
I'll be sad alone later.
Okay, right. But also, at least I believe it's a confirmation for the audience. Oh, someone else is feeling the way that I feel. And,
Yeah. That's it, right? Yeah. It's not you don't want to express your sadness alone. You want to offer it to someone. I think it's a gift, so that you can see yourself in this, right?
Yeah, and like it's the gift is, oh, someone else gets this. I'm not the only one who is feeling this way.
Yeah.
And I think you get that invisible bond, with that band or that artist, because it's like, all right, sorry, hit the mic. That that's where it becomes magic, where it's like, all right, feelings are being exchanged more than just words and a beat.
Yeah, and more than just a like commercial exchange.
Yeah.
I think a lot about that, how all the spaces we gather are commercial spaces to share music. Mm-hmm. And then there's a barrier to entry in terms of having to pay something. So in my mind, like, the exchange that you're talking about is best happens in a place where it's like, I invite you into my home, or like, let's go to a place together where we can really experience something. Mm-hmm. And all the commercial aspects, it's the thing that you balance as a professional musician who needs to make money to make a living doing it. So I'm just aware of it makes the genuineness of what you just said more important, because I'm aware of there being a lot of barriers no matter where you do it. Although I have to say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
A baseball park is a cool place, which is where we're playing at the end of June. A baseball park is a cool place to have a musical experience, I think.
Okay. I don't know. Well, yeah, so you're talking about with that music festival, which is happening in June, which is all Carolina artists.
Yeah.
And it's you and American Aquarium and a Mountain Goats and Delta Ray and all these really cool bands. And I'm very curious because it's going to be held in Durham Bulls baseball park.
Yeah.
The only time I've been in a baseball park is for a big show, like it was U2.
They played there, really?
Not there. They played where the Angels play in Los Angeles, California.
Nice.
So
yeah, that'd be fun.
So that was, like this. I think will be, because there'll be several stages, and so it'll be kind of a cool space. But that was all right. We're going to turn this into one humongous, communal space. So, but I see what you mean. It's like, America's pastime and the pastoral setting of it all.
Yeah, and it's also like you're usually there for a game, which is just like silly. Games don't really make sense.
Yeah.
In a way that music doesn't really make sense. There's something that matches there.
Right.
Plus, I have a lot of fond memories of summertime baseball games. No memories of the games. But of the being there.
I mean, not to go off on a tangent, and I love this band, but they said, people that were there and talk about the Rolling Stones at Altamont said, they said a speedway is not a good spot for.
That's interesting.
There's the minute you got there, there's just the vibe of, there were accidents, and it's like it was a place of aggression and violence, and
that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Which affected that day. I guess, didn't the Hells Angels affect that day pretty heavily too?
Yeah, they hired the Hells Angels to be security, and they killed someone, from what I recall. So not the brightest.
That inspired one of the great Dead tunes. Didn't that inspire Black Peter or something?
It may have.
There's one of the tunes from Working Man's Dead that was based on Altamont.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're right. I don't recall, but yeah.
Speaking of like sharing the dismay of life.
Right.
That being powerful, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a big Robert Hunter fan, for sure.
Oh, yeah, and all right, I could go off on that tangent, but
I got time.
Because because I had the book of all of Robert Hunter's lyrics, and
cool.
just read through it. It's fabulous. But
Yeah.
but to get back on track to your music, and specifically your new-ish self-titled
Yeah.
album, when asked in another interview about why this one, several albums into your career, you finally did a self-titled one, and you said, we hit a certain stride on this one. We finally felt like we understood how to work together. It was like, yeah, we know who we are now. Let's call it Mipso. And what I'm wondering is, can you explain a little bit more about what level you achieved that maybe, you hadn't reached before?
Yeah. I think that what I said was true in the sense that like we found like we had arrived at ourselves. But I think also following that logic, you could name every album Mipso.
Yeah.
Like self-titled could be an endless process because ideally if you're a band that kind of like grows together every couple of years when you make a record, it will be a slightly different version of what the formula is. On this one, I think it was more like it followed a recommitment to being in the band. We had a tough time making the record before that, Edge's Run. Tough within the band, in the context of making the band, which was January 2017 in the winter in the cold northern Oregon.
Yeah.
Physically, politically, everything, Also, we were like 27 and I think entering a phase where we were like needing to figure ourselves out more, all of us. So this record, the self-titled record, it followed a process of us, and this is the part of being in a band that people don't see, but we're like four people who are committed to each other in a sort of sense, in a way that the only way we normally talk about it out in the world, I think, is through marriage. We're not married, but it's a cousin to that experience, I think. Like we're both like creative and business partners. We orient our lives together. We talk about when our distinct families can take vacations because we have to coordinate that with our tour schedules.
Right.
We're pretty close.
Yeah.
Like Libby and I make the same jokes all the time. Like we're always saying jinx because like I don't know. There's when you grow with someone like that.
Yeah.
And we right before making the self-titled album, we like all took a step back and we're like, we need to make sure we still want to be in this band. We decided yes, and we made this record as like, this is what we want to do. And part of that spirit was like, we're not trying to fix ourselves. We're not trying to be a different band. There's I think I like weird bands, and I think we're kind of a weird band in some ways. And I think on this record, we were like, the best way for us to make music is to let that happen. We know who we are, let's just do that thing,
Right. But I think it's cool because it also speaks to you weren't willing to phone it in. Because there's lots of artists, they're like, well, maybe we're not feeling it, but we can just keep this going.
Totally. I know, yeah. Cash the checks.
Yeah.
Get that mailbox money, as people say.
Yeah.
We're not to the place where we get mailbox money so much.
Yeah.
We got to go out and get ticket money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate that too. We only want to do this, I think, if we can really be excited about the project. And to me, combining four people into a thing that's greater than the sum of those parts is a very hard and very cool project. And speaking of and phoning it in, like maybe if you're a solo artist and you can just like hire a producer and be like, do whatever you want, that's a possibility for phoning it in. But our process is like four people who all are kind of intense in our own ways, really, talking about the thing and making it happen. It's quite the opposite of phoning it in, I think.
Well, that reminds me, because in reading up, there was kind of this gap in your history from my perspective, just in trying, because it had you guys meeting as friends in college.
Yeah.
And it talked about, okay, step one, you meet, you become friends, then you become musicians, really.
Yeah.
Which is the backwards way of a lot of the way things are done. And then suddenly, next thing you know, you're a band kind of thing. And, I'm just wondering, so how does that evolve, where you like people enough and you decide, yeah, we should become a band, even though we don't really know how to play.
Yeah, totally. Well, we were all interested in learning about the music of North Carolina, and that's kind of how the band started. We never put up signs on lampposts that said like, call this number for if you want to play bass in a bluegrass band.
Right.
It was like, and that was sort of in the air at the time. It was 2011, 2012, and we started to want to learn more about the, I'd say, old time and bluegrass music that comes from this state. And we were doing that with our friends who were also interested in that. Mm-hmm. And it gradually evolved into a band just because people started asking us to play. But we did have to decide to like name ourselves something, and we chose Mipso because we were like, well, we're not trying to be the Chapel Hill Mountain Boys, you know. Although we're playing these instruments, there was always a kind of sense of maybe ambivalence, but I think it's more like, you know, willingness to be more than just one thing in terms of the genre pigeonholing.
Right, right.
But yeah, becoming a band meant that we had to put ourselves on stage and make it seem much more official than just the friends in a living room that we had been. Mm-hmm. And it was weird at the beginning because we weren't very good musicians. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it felt uncomfortable, as if we were pretending like we were. We were like, I mean, we want to be in a band, but I'm 21 and I want to learn about music, and can I, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So it took us a while, I think, to, like, we grew into ourselves in public in a way. Mm-hmm. There was a hunger for a band like us, maybe, and we were doing something we loved, and people started loving it before we were mature musicians, that's for sure. Yeah. So that's been a fun part of the process, like, because every one of our records has been super different, necessarily, because we've been changing a bunch, learning so much. Like we talked about my guitar playing. The way I play guitar now is completely different from our first record. You don't have to know that to listen to our new record. Okay. But it's fun, I think, for folks who've been listening to us for a while. And every record's been pretty
different in the sense of what you were talking about earlier about that need to fill up the space with as much sound as possible, or
also just being a better musician. Okay.
But I mean, from your perspective, what does that mean to be a better musician?
Yeah. Having more of a personality. I think when any instrumentalist or songwriter starts out, you have to do it by copying. Right. I mean, some people are better at not doing that than other people. I think the end goal is to find a place where you're really, you know, making music that feels honest to you and your desires, rather than painting by numbers. But when I started out, I think the only way to really learn was to, you know, fill in the lines a little bit. Right. And I don't do that as much anymore. Although I feel like generously, I'd like to think I'm like 30% of the way there to becoming a real musician.
Well, I think that's true with any, I guess you could call it any art form. Like Stephen King wrote this book about writing called On Writing. Cool. And in there he admitted that when he was starting out, he's like, you write like whatever you're into, you know. There was a time he was into Ray Bradbury, so he was, you know, writing very colorful science fiction-y kind of prose, and then he, you know, went more in this direction, and he said that's just natural because you're learning the craft by imitating people who you would like and admire, totally, and then eventually you stumble upon your own voice, and you're like, oh, okay, this is me.
Yeah, it's cool to hear about a process that from the outside feels really natural looking in, you know? Like, Stephen King's a great writer, great story conjurer, and I think that any way he did it would be like suitable to me. But I can imagine if I were Stephen King in my own head being like, oh shit, that book was too much like Ray Bradbury, you know what I mean? Yeah, I think exactly. From the inside of it, there is kind of a turmoil to like the ping-ponging of like figuring out what you want to make next. There is for me. But I like to think about, it's good to have examples of or reminders that that's just the process, that's the way it works. Yeah,
okay. And then, at least with this album, you either solo wrote or co-wrote many of the songs on this particular album. So first off, what is your writing process? Do you have a writing process?
Yeah. It has to do with with sitting down with a guitar and having nothing else distracting me, and also not being too afraid to build this in as a part of life.
All right, what do you mean by that?
There was many years when the prospect of writing was terrifying, and I've gotten to the main reason I'd say to my life that I feel good waking up in the morning right now, there's a lot of reasons, is that I've kind of figured out a way to build writing into my life, and it makes me a much happier person.
Okay.
So yeah, I like to spend, do a couple of morning things. I have my tea routine, my breakfast routine, hard-boiled eggs and quinoa. That's true. And then exercise usually before going on a run. And then I like to spend 3 or 4 hours sitting down, preferably outside, with a guitar and a pad of paper and a pen.
And then, what are your expectations for yourself? Like, as long as, because there are some people I know who like build in habits, and they're like, all right, if nothing comes out, as long as I went through the steps, it was still worthwhile.
I like that perspective.
Yeah.
I think you have to think of it as play rather than production. For me, I need to enjoy it.
Okay.
And that might mean like you write a super silly country song. Like sometimes I do, if that's where your mind is.
Yeah.
I have a morning writing process where I just fill up a couple pages first. That's the first thing I do when I wake up. I forgot to mention that.
Okay.
Before tea. And it's kind of like a purge. Or kind of like priming the pump, you know?
Yeah.
It's, to me, I think it's a way of like, I think what you do first thing in the morning is important to how your day is oriented, right?
Yeah.
It's felt that way to me. Who you wake up with is important. Whether you see an animal right away is important. Those are things people maybe don't always notice, but they're built in. But then the first thing you actively, deliberately do, for me, if I play with words first thing in the morning, it's just a one way of reminding me that like, I love to play with words, and I'm gonna make that a part of my day. So if I do that in the morning, whether I have time to write or not.
Okay.
Like today I didn't write music. But yesterday I didn't have time to write music, but I started out my morning with a long drive. And I was writing a song while I was driving because I was just trying to work through this idea that I had. So it's kind of, I think that's a good thing. If you build it into your day and make it, like keep continuously reminding yourself, for me, reminding myself that it's important to me and I enjoy it, then I'm more likely to like be able to take that into my life and like actually do it often enough to write good songs.
Yeah.
To like the iceberg of, you know, the bullshit, you know, the good songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so for this self-titled album, what was one of the more challenging tunes to craft?
Good question. I'd say, as a part of that category, that I never feel like a Mipso song is a Mipso song until the rest of the band's had their hand on it, whether I finished the lyric myself or not. Which was a good realization and part of why I still actively feel excited about playing with this band. The one really hard one for me to write was Never Knew You Were Gone. It's the first track on the record. It's a little, people have told me, well actually I've realized this by people asking me, what is that about? That it's not clear what that song is about. But it is a story of a kid escaping feels like a kind of a violent household by going out into the woods and exploring and looking at the stars and looking at the trees and seeing the moon and feeling like that is this a space we have access to and something we should remind ourselves. And the last stanza is about, you know, but is that a beautiful space if all of us are gone? Isn't it us that gives that space its sense of meaning to us? What we're talking about is the relationship between humans and nature, not something nature has innately. So I think that's a way of like posing the question, if a tree falls in the forest.
Yeah.
Which is to say, like, I think it's kind of like a rumination on extinction a little bit. Not just humans, but all the other kinds that are happening too.
Okay, all right.
It was hard to write because I had to kind of figure out what it was about as I was writing it.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that most people don't listen to that song and hear a version of what I just said, but that's where it comes from for me. So.
Yeah, well, again, that's everyone takes their own meaning from all these other different kinds of songs.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of musicians who refuse to tell anyone what songs are about.
Really?
Well, they don't want to ruin it for whatever.
That's interesting.
The listener said. Like, if that's your interpretation, great. Go with it.
I feel that. I like that.
Yeah.
This was. I always think of it in terms of a gift to me. Like that's the only way I can make my life about this process and feel good about it. I think.
Yeah.
But like it feels to me like this was given to me as a gift. I have to give it away as a gift. You know what I mean? I don't exactly, as much as I've thought about songwriting process, I've read a lot about it, and tried to figure it out in my own life, I don't really understand it. I think there's an element of it that is a mystery, period. And the goal shouldn't be to figure out the mystery. The goal should be to live with it. And the way the mystery feels to me is, it's like you get given something, and you have to give it away.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which is why it sucks to charge money for it. If we had a different system where where money could just happen, I could just have money otherwise.
Yes.
Or not even money, access to food and guitars.
Right.
And a place to play them. I would give it all away.
Yeah. Really nice guitars, though.
Really nice guitars.
Yeah.
I'll take a 1937 D18. I'll take we can do the whole rest of the interview.
Right.
I need a Strat. Oh.
Yeah, or a Telly.
My first guitar was a Telly.
Oh.
And I have replaced every part of it to where that it's not the same. None of the original parts are the same part. Or it's not the same guitar, but it is to me.
Yeah.
Because I did them all one at a time. And now I've recently realized, like, maybe I should give up this original guitar being the guitar and just get a nice Telly. You know what I mean?
I get it. Yeah. And speaking of instruments, I thought it was funny. So I was going through the notes on this album. One of the instruments it says that you play on this album is, quote, toy piano. How did that come about?
Man, that was so much fun. I walked 12 blocks in Brooklyn with a toy piano. We borrowed it from our friend Adam's house. It's a piano that you would get for a kid that makes that like a tiny little ding ding, like bell-like sound.
Yeah.
Because it was this song called "Let a Little Light In." That's about childhood, and it's about like trying to remember what it was like to be a kid and how hard that is sometimes.
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, this feels like we should have a little kid noise.
Mm-hmm.
Which was fun because the process of playing it, I'd never played the song on piano, didn't really know what key it was in. And I just was like plunking around randomly.
Yeah.
And we kept the parts that sounded cool. Yeah, that was my toy piano debut. And the last time I'll ever try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just out of curiosity, does he have a kid or did he just happen to have a child's toy?
Good question.
Piano.
It's because he's a music teacher.
Okay. All right.
So kids have access to it.
Right.
It wasn't just his personal.
Yeah. Okay.
It was like a travel piano. I always thought you could take it on a plane. You know?
And then so many things.
Yeah, sure. I know I keep rambling on.
No, this is cool. I just want to be conscious of your time.
Good.
Well, one thing I did want to talk about is you guys have been doing what you call the 2022 cover series.
Yeah.
A bunch of songs, not yours, but that you've played live often, but now you're actually making recordings of them.
Yeah.
What made you decide to finally record these songs?
The pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We were dedicated to these songs never being recorded, being a live part of our repertoire. And I think that that's one thing I would say I took from some of my favorite jam bands, which is that they have covers that you can look forward to maybe seeing at a show. And it's one of their songs. It's not something they learn just for one show and to put aside forever. It's like, it's sort of like they've put their spin on it. It's one of their songs.
Yeah.
So we thought those songs would live only at shows, but when we stopped playing shows for a year, we missed playing them, and we had a lot of people ask about them. And it made me realize that we've put work into creating our versions of these songs, that it's cool to document that and let people have those.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think in hindsight, the way I would have done it would have been releasing live versions of the songs, like let us actually play them live, so it really is the live version.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any shows.
Yeah.
And we tried to keep the arrangements pretty close to what we did live. Actually, on a couple of them, we changed them a ton. We made them more like studio songs. But once you get in the studio, you gotta just follow what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was a way for us to kind of like document these tunes that we've been living with for many years. So we didn't arrange these songs for the project. These were the 6 songs that had stood the test of time and had kept cropping up in our sets for many years.
Okay. Yeah. Now my favorite story about like cover tunes and really making a mark with with something was when Jimi Hendrix covered All Along the Watchtower.
Yeah.
Dylan liked it better than his original version.
Is that right?
And so he started playing it that way whenever he played it in concert.
That's
You
cool.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dylan loves changing an arrangement.
Yeah.
That's funny because one of the lyrics is wrong in his version. I forget which one he sang wrong, but
Oh, in Hendrix's version?
yeah.
Huh.
But Dylan changes his lyrics all the time too, so he probably liked that.
Right.
Also, I saw him a few weeks ago.
Dylan?
Yeah.
Oh.
With my dad and my brother. My dad's a huge fan. Kind of like raised us on Dylan.
Yeah.
So he got us these mega expensive tickets to watch Dylan.
How did he sound?
Dylan-y.
Okay.
Yeah. His voice is awesome right now. He's so weird. The band is so weird. His stage presence is so weird. But I love that
Yeah.
he could be like phoning in the hits, but instead he's trying to like make his own weird stuff.
Yeah. Well, actually, because I'm reading his Chronicles
Oh, I love
autobiography
Chronicles,
book,
yeah.
you know, and it talks about where he's making this transition and like, all right, not everyone is going to get this, but you know, trust me, I know this is important and this is what I should be doing. Kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Totally. Yeah, there's a great picture of him in that era with a NWA hoodie on, hanging out in New Orleans, making a record with Daniel Lanois.
Okay. Okay.
Such a cool vibe back then.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of Dylan too, where he's, you know, like he wants to be obscure. He prefers to be seen as mysterious and obscure, so he like crafts that on purpose, which can be annoying. Like when he did it unselfconsciously through much of his career. I love Infidels. '83 is like my favorite Dylan record, but I love like Empire Burlesque and Saved are such cool records too. I'm fully a fan of his weirdo middle-aged phase.
Well, also, I think at least what it came out in the book is like he really got uncomfortable with people calling him, you know, the prophet of his era, and
Yeah.
you know, looking to him for, you know, enlightenment, and so he was purposely trying to throw people off by, all right, I'm going to be a little weird, so
Yeah.
maybe you'll go on to someone else and that
Totally.
kind of thing.
Yeah, leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly.
That look at me, don't look at me thing. you know.
Right.
Dylan has a heavy dose of that. Yeah.
Although my favorite story was, you know, when they were doing the Traveling Wilburys, and they were asking the interview with Tom Petty, and they're like, you know, you idolize Dylan. Is it weird, you know, hanging out with him? Is it, you know? Or, he's like, no. He's like, just treat him like a guy. You could just go up to him and say, hey, Bob, what time is it? And he'll say, hey, Tom, it's about 4 o'clock. I'm like, yeah, I could totally picture the two of those guys having that exchange.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, I would love to just see videos of Tom Petty asking Bob Dylan what time it is.
Right.
I could watch that for hours.
That would be fabulous, yes.
You could put that in the museum.
Right.
On the minute, every minute, all day long. It's Bob Dylan responding, 401.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, they have the London chimes in England, and we would have Dylan out here. Yeah.
The Dylan scruffy
Yeah.
chime. I don't know.
Listening to the Mipso album, you guys do some interesting harmonizing, and not harmonizing where it's not just like the typical, all right, everyone comes in at the chorus, you know, but times where it's like you're singing and then you suddenly hear Libby back you up for like a couple of words, and then step in, step out, and then step in, step out. How does that come about? Because it's very interesting, but I can't imagine it being plotted like with sheet music or anything.
That's a good observation. Yeah, thank you. I think because we've been a band for a long time, we have a level of fluency with each other's voices too. So there's times when I'm writing something where I'll be like, it'd be cool to hear Libby on this, and I could suggest it to her. Or like, I bet Jake could get right below me and Libby could get right above me in harmony-wise. But usually it's a part of the process of playing around with the tune. We just try different stuff. Yeah, and it's cool to not feel limited by like a chorus. A chorus has to have the harmony, and then you back off.
Yeah.
That's fun, but yeah, we'd like to play around with it, I guess is the answer.
Okay. And then do you keep experimenting, like even live? Like, you know, all right, tonight, maybe let's try this, or, you know.
Not as much.
Okay.
Usually live, we play with it some, but usually we've landed on what we feel is like the best arrangement. Yeah. Harmonies we don't mess with so much. Like we'll do shows where we change the instruments we play, like where I won't play any electric. We'll do more like a stripped down show, and that can totally change the way the song feels. but the harmonies we kind of like settle on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the stuff I
Sweet.
got.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.